Alrighty, folks, we're live. Welcome to Edmonton Python User Group, broadcasting from our homes. Hopefully, everyone's staying safe, staying healthy tonight. This is going to be our first time ever doing this, so bear with us. We already ran into some technical difficulties. Pro tip: if you're using Jitsi and you're hoping to host on YouTube, apparently right now they've run out of bandwidth, so we had to find a different streaming provider at the last second. Without further ado, you can find EdmontonPy on the web, on Twitter. There is an echo. Okay. Why is there an echo? Let me double check to see what's going on here. I was just about to get everything ready, and whoops.
Just a heads up. Sorry, Aaron, to interrupt. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I think that the echo is only on your end because I don't hear it whatsoever.
Okay, never mind. We got a pebcac issue. That's all good. I know who this person is, so I can give them a hard time after. Without further ado, you can find us on the web. You can find us on Twitter at EdmontonPy. We're also on devempson.slack.com in the Meetup Edmonton Py channel. We're also on YouTube. We have talks on YouTube going all the way back to June 2019. So we've got a growing backlog of talks. While we're not meeting at Startup Edmonton, we do want to thank them as our sponsor because they have given us their space for many, many years. So thanks to Startup Edmonton for offering their space, even though we're not using it this month. I just wanted to also mention that if people haven't been checking, that both the government of Alberta and government of Canada have COVID-19 resources. So even if you have checked them out, do check in from time to time just to make sure you're in the loop on what's the latest recommendations. If we were meeting in person, we have something called the Pac-Man rule. The Pac-Man rule is when you're standing as a group of people to try and leave room for one person to join your group. Now, obviously, since you're at home right now, hopefully, this doesn't technically apply. But when we do, because we will meet in person someday, try to kind of stand in a nice way so that there's a space for someone to join your group. So for jobs this month, we have a couple postings locally. XKey AI Estimation is a startup in Startup Edmonton at the moment, and they're looking for a junior machine learning engineer. So a recent grad who has experience with Python and machine learning, for example, like PyTorch. They're looking for someone like that. Meadow.ai, I believe, is also in Startup Edmonton. They're looking for a machine learning engineer. They also have a software development intern position. Now, that one, it says .NET experience, but because you're an intern, I don't think they expect that you have any of that, coming into the position. So take a look at those. There will be links to the slides in the YouTube as well. There's also some online links as well. Someone had created a Hacker News who is hiring scraper, so take a look at that. There's also remotepython.com and remoteok.io. If anyone is looking for a job or is looking to hire great people, please visit the opportunities channel at our Dev Edmonton Slack. So for events this month, they are all, with no surprise, happening online. Python Pizza was a link that was shared in our Meetup-EdmontonPy channel, and that one's happening April 25th, starting at a pretty rough time for our mountain time zone, but it goes on for quite a long while. So it starts at 2 a.m. in the morning for us at mountain time, and it goes until pretty late. And PyCon US 2020, while they at first were saying that they were canceled, they are going to be trying to make the talks available online. So if you go to the link in our slides, and we'll have the links to the slide in the video description, they will be releasing the talks within the next 6 weeks. So if you submit your email to them, they will have the talks as they're available. On to the news. So this month, I think there's kind of two big things. The very first release candidate for the final version of Python 2 was released in early April. And just a hint, please move to Python 3. I did provide a link to the official Python documentation to help you port from Python 2 to 3. So take a look at those. There's also been a couple bug fixes that have been released for Django, Flask, and Pandas. And definitely not least, there is a new sponsorship program that has been released by the Python Software Foundation, and it's aiming to provide financial support for package maintainers on PyPy. So that's very exciting. A lot of us are building packages and maintaining them without a lot of financial support. So having a sponsorship program that is official and is being managed by the Python Software Foundation is highly welcome. In terms of podcasts, Talk Python 254 is talking about thriving in a remote development environment. So much of the world is working from home right now. Maybe this is a new experience for some of you, or maybe this is actually something you've been doing for a while. Either way, being effective while working remotely away from the office is an increasingly valuable skill that most of us in the tech industry have to quickly embrace. So take a listen to that podcast if that interests you. As well, Podcast Init has a talk on distributed computing in Python, made easy with Ray. Ray is a distributed computing tool. It increases the speed and performance of applications while not being too difficult and complex to kind of set up. On that podcast, Robert Nishihara, who created Ray, talks about kind of how he developed Ray and how it's made scaling Python projects in multiple cores across machines easy for him, as well as a couple other people who are using Ray today. And last, we have Test and Code, episode 108. This goes into PySpark. So Apache Spark is a unified analytics engine for large-scale data processing. PySpark blends the powerful Spark big data processing engine with a Python programming language to provide a data analysis platform that can scale up for nearly any task. Jonathan Rio, author of PySpark in Action, joins the show and gives us a great introduction to Spark and PySpark to help us decide how to get started and whether or not to decide if Spark and PySpark are right for you. On to articles. We have first Python for Beginners by Daniel Lowengrub. He actually wrote this article intended for middle and high school students. So honestly, it's written in a really nice way. I took a look at it, and it does break down Python and programming into small bite-sized chunks, and it's very easy to follow. Next, we have Arduino with Python, so how to get started in there. Real Python's a great resource, not only because I like the way that they've laid out their tutorials, but I also learned that a lot of the tutorials that they post are actually, Real Python actually pays their authors. So it's very high quality resources. So take a look at that as well. Third, we have cognitive biases in software development. Stanislav has compiled a couple biases that he's noticed, and whenever developers are writing code. So take a look at that to see if there are areas where when you're writing code, when you're making decisions, are you jumping towards a bias and how can you correct that? Next, we have from Cloud City Development a blog post, things I wish they told me about multiprocessing in Python. This article was from 2019, but it does talk about the multiprocessing module in Python and kind of the pitfalls, the successes that happened while that person was learning about what it was like using the multiprocessing module. And next we have PsychoPG3, a first report. So Daniel's actually one of the maintainers on a package called PsychoPG2. And if you're a Django or I guess Django developer and you're using Postgres as your database, you are relying heavily on the PsychoPG2 project, if I'm not mistaken. And so early on this year, PsychoPG3 was in kind of a very designish planning stage. And Daniel has written a blog post about his first pass on using PsychoPG3 and building PsychoPG3. One of the biggest things with PsychoPG3 is that Python is moving more and more to an asynchronous programming paradigm. And PsychoPG 2, unfortunately, was built with a lot of blocking operations. And one of the design goals of PsychoPG 3 is to become as asynchronous, concurrent as possible so that Python and PsychoPG 3 are built for future projects written in Python. Next, we also have a blog post by Brett going into what the heck is PyProject.toml. So this kind of riffs off of one of Eddie's talks about pipenv versus poetry that was done recently. And in that talk, Eddie went into a little bit about what PyProject.toml is. And so Brett here has kind of expanded on what PyProject.toml is, what it's all about. It's not just for package managers. It's also now going to be a centralized way to define and manage your project structures of basically any Python project. Last, and this is kind of more of a joke because it was released on April 1st, 3 Python templating languages you should probably never use, but opensource.com does kind of go into 3 really interesting templating languages, and do take a look at it. They do conclude with templating languages you should be using as well, so it's not a complete waste of time. Next, we have a Python tip of the month, and this goes into floating points versus decimal. So floating point arithmetic is kind of misleading at the best of times when it comes to Python. So in the first line, we add 0.1 3 times, and it's equivalent to multiplying 0.1 by 3. However, if you look at the next 2 lines, why does that return false? You would think that 0.1 plus 0.1 plus 0.1 should equal 0.3, or 0.1 times 3 should equal 0.3, but they don't. And that's because of floating point calculations. And most of the time, using floating points is fine, but there are contexts where decimal arithmetic is important. Let's say you're building a financial application. And while decimal arithmetic does have a performance impact, sometimes you do need that level of precision, and that's where the decimal module and the decimal class comes into play. So by using the decimal object and defining it, initializing it with 0.1 in a string, we get an exact representation of 1/10. And because we have an exact representation, now our statements, all 3, will return true. Unfortunately, you cannot mix decimal and floating point together. So if you try to do that, Python will raise a type error exception telling you that you can't do operations with a float and a decimal object. And really, I do think this is a really good error to begin with, because if you are using the decimal module and decimal class, why are you introducing floating point inaccuracies? So this is actually a really nice error. And when it comes to the next meetup in May, we're going to call it a maybe. See what I did there? All right, but seriously, we're going to try and make it happen. We're going to see how this all works. Let us know how this is working. It seems like things are working all right. And if we need to, we're going to try this all over again. All right, so today's talks, we've got 2 lined up. And the first one is solving moral philosophy forever using FastAI, Reddit, and Python. And then the next one that we have is building a crappy Jeopardy with Django Channels by Dan. And so without further ado, I'm going to now pass the baton over to Paul, and we'll get his talk started.
Excellent. So thanks very much, Aaron. I should have taken over the screen, I believe. Yes. So thanks, everyone. I'm really excited to give this talk. This is my first time at the Python Meetup. It's also my first time giving a talk at a meetup. So I really appreciate you letting me come and show you what I did. It's not going to be that technical of a talk. It's going to be more of a fun little pet project that I did. It's a bit of a toy. And not to overstate it, but I pretty much solved moral philosophy forever using FastAI, Reddit, and Python. So you'll never have any more ethical dilemmas. You can just type it into the machine and it'll tell you whether it's moral or immoral. So for the presentation, I'm just going to give a quick introduction about myself. I'm going to say what the project actually is. Like I said, I may have overstated a little. I'm going to talk about where it's hosted, and I'm also going to talk about the code that I use to train the model and to deploy the model. So my name's Paul. I'm a student at NATE right now. I'm going to be graduating at the end of the month in computer software development. I came back to school at the beginning of 2019 after working in sales for the better part of a decade because I wanted to learn how to program. And I'm a candidate for being one of those people from the movies that accidentally destroy the world using technology they don't really understand. But the people that understand it seem to be doing that already. So at least I'm going to be in good company, I think. Anyway, we'll talk about the actual application. So the actual application is just a simple text classifier that I trained on posts and verdicts from the subreddit Am I the A-hole? And if you've ever been to the subreddit, people basically just post something that they did or something that happened. And then other people will say whether they're the a-hole in that situation, whether they're not the a-hole, if everyone involved sucks, or if there are no a-holes there. So obviously it's a great place to get unbiased information to solve big ethical questions. But if you're a hiring manager, this is a RESTful machine learning application with microservice architecture that's been deployed on the cloud using DevOps best practices. It leverages deep learning and the principles of sentiment analysis for the categorical analysis of user-defined data. And if that grabs you, I am looking for work, so feel free to reach out to me after this presentation. But this is the actual thing. It's just a little tiny project. This is a website that's being served up through Django. You type in the thing that you did, you send it, when you submit, it sends it as a post request to Django REST framework. It runs the method and it'll run the text that's typed in through the trained model. And then it outputs a category, which is then sent to the response to the web page. And you can see here, it's I microwave fish in the break room, one of the cardinal sins, obviously. You hit judge me and then it sends it off, sends it back, and it gives an immoral judgment. And here is the actual live website. So one thing we all know to be a moral action, I gave my cat a little salami as a treat, but just to make sure, we hit submit, it sends it off, and then it gives us the response. So it is moral, as we all knew, but now we know for sure because the machine told us that it's true. This solution is hosted on the Cyber Rapid Access Cloud. And if you haven't heard of this or you've never used it, it's pretty cool. We actually get free virtual resources just from being Albertans. I'm pretty sure that it's supposed to be an incubator, like a tech incubator, and something to do research on. So my obvious super serious and important machine learning research was done there. One really cool thing about it is we get free GPU resources as well. So I think they have K80s and Titans, and you can cut out a VM that has those to train a model on. You only get it for 24 hours and then it shuts itself down. But depending on what you're doing, for me, it only took 4 hours of training, but I think that was even way too much. Like this is kind of a simple joke project. But yeah, it's really cool. And then we also get regular resources. So this is where it's deployed right now. This is the IP. If you go there, you can access what you just saw. And yeah, the price is right, so I don't have to pay for anything. If you haven't used it, like I said, you should really go check it out because it's something that we get just for being Albertans, and it's awesome. In terms of the actual software package, I made it using FastAI. And FastAI is a Python library, but it's also a group of people that have a nonprofit. And the tagline for it is making neural nets uncool again. So my understanding of what they're trying to do is to democratize deep learning in a way that makes it accessible to people like myself who only have, a year of coding experience and no math past high school. Their library is a wrapper that's on top of PyTorch, Pandas, NumPy, Matplotlib, and some other libraries that are associated with ML. And you can actually access the methods and everything that you would need from those libraries directly, even if you're using FastAI. And you'll see that in the code a little bit. You can train and deploy tons of different models. They have image recognition, text classification like this. You can do generative models. You can even make GANs with it for like image upscaling, which is crazy. But it's really cool. And they actually have several online courses, but the one that I had followed and used was Practical Deep Learning for Coders. And most of this project is adapted from one of the lessons. In their lesson, they did sentiment analysis on IMDb reviews, so like positive and negative. And I pretty much just used that when I made this project. For the data set, when I had initially thought about doing this, I was looking around on the internet and I found a website called pushshift.io, and it had literally every post from Reddit ever. So I was a little worried about having to download so many 100 gigabytes of Reddit data just to get what I was looking for. And then I did a little bit more research and stumbled upon the exact data set. So it was a cleansed data set that had all of the posts from Am I the A-hole and also all of the verdicts. So L. O'Brien, thank you very much. And I do have links to all of this at the end of the talk if you want to make something silly like I did, or something useful. But if it's from Reddit, I doubt that it'll be useful. And here we actually get into the code. So this is all that we needed. Well, there's going to be 3 sections, but it's much, much simpler than you would expect in terms of training a machine learning model. So we're actually importing FastAI.txt, we're importing everything from that library. And then we're just creating a path so we can get at our stuff. And then we use pandas right here, as you can see, to create the data frame. So we're still pulling it in so that our model will be able to use it in that way. Here is just a method so you can see your data. And then I had to do a little bit of cleansing, even though it was pre-cleansed, because there were issues with NaN values in the body and the verdict columns after I had pulled it in. So what's happening here is we're actually going to be creating 2 different models. One is going to be the language model, and then another one is going to be the actual classifier. And FastAI has something called a data bunch, and the data bunch is how FastAI will package your data in order to give it to your machine learning model to be trained from. And here we can see that we're using the data frame. We're choosing the column that's going to be important. So in this case, for the language model, we're using the body column. After that, we're splitting off 20% of the data for a validation set. And then we're just saying that it's going to be a language model, so we don't need any labels, and then turning it into the data bunch. And this is batch size, and that's just a performance thing. So here we're doing the exact same thing, but we have 2 important differences. Since we're making a classifier, obviously we need labels. So the labels are going to be given, which are the verdicts from our data set. And then here we're giving vocabulary. And super oversimplification of this is that we're making sure that the tokenization and numericalization of the words are going to be the exact same. So both of our models can speak the same language, so to speak. Here is all we need to do to train the actual language model. So when we create the learner, we have a constructor that's going to be taking in the data bunch that we had created. We have the architecture of the model itself, and then you can add some other parameters, and this is dropout. I'm not going to get into it. That's outside of my scope for now, but as I understand it, it kind of deactivates certain nodes to prevent overfitting in your model. One of the cool things about FastAI, though, is that it employs transfer learning, so it'll bring down a pre-trained model that FastAI had already trained. And this model was trained on Wikitext 103, which is a data set of all of the Wikipedia articles. So the model knows English pretty well already, that kind of English from Wikipedia. And after that, we just have to train it. And this is all the code that's needed to train the model for 1 cycle. So the first parameter here is epoch. And an epoch is the amount of time it takes to go through all of the data, an epoch is going through all of the data once. And then the second parameter is the learning rate. So you can change these things kind of on the fly. Unfreezing will allow you to unfreeze a certain amount of layers. So in this case, because we had a pre-trained model that we were starting with, it froze all of those layers. So when we actually trained it, no modifications were made to the weights for those layers. And in this case, we're actually unfreezing it, and then we're just training the entire model. So every layer is going to get, or all of the weights will be rebalanced, again, for lack of a better technical term, since I'm a bit of a beginner. But afterwards, we can see that the model was trained reasonably well. So we can run learn.predict, and for this language model, it has the ability to generate some text. So what I wanted to check, first of all, if it was being trained properly on our body of text. So I typed in, I had a big fight with my blank, and then I wanted it to generate something of 20 words. And if you look down here, you can see that it says, I had a big fight with my current boyfriend, and she was angry and her with the hateful words that she yells at my wife. If you've ever been to Am I the A-hole, it's pretty much people just complaining about relationships, so that's pretty accurate, I think. And after that, we save this part of the trained model, the encoder part, so that we can use it in our classifier. And again, to be super reductionist, the encoder is just so that our classifier will be able to understand the words better that it's taking in before classifying it. And now for the actual classification, it's just as simple. We passed in the data bunch, the architecture, and the other parameters, but then we also passed in the encoder, which was from the model that we had previously trained. We do the same thing as we did before in terms of training it on all the data set with the labels, and then we train it again. Here, when we export it, it's going to export it as a .pickle file. So everything that we just did in terms of the training will be exported into one file that we can load later when we actually want to use the model, which is pretty cool. After it was trained, I did a little prediction. So this is what is actually happening in terms of the model that is the classifier. So here I said, I told my girlfriend that she looked weird in that dress. It said that I'm an a-hole, and it's 53% sure that I'm an a-hole. So it's not, super sure, but it's still the highest out of all of the different things. Afterwards, I checked to see if this was an a-hole thing to do, which I thought it was. My father and I had an argument, and he swore at me, so I kicked the dog. But the machine thinks with 70% certainty that that's not an a-hole action. So I guess maybe it knows things that I don't. But after that, in terms of just deploying the model, it was super simple. I didn't do anything crazy. This is just my urls.py from Django. So you can see this path right here is just index.html. So that's what you saw there with the form and the beautiful philosophers. And then this is the route for the post request. It's going to be running processes and respond, which is the method that's going to be infused.py. So you'll see that in the next slide. And here is all that I did to deploy the actual model. So we had the model deployed. I put the pickle file over into my onto my Django server, and then I loaded the learner by just using this constructor for the learner object and passing it the pickle file that had been exported that contains everything pre-trained. Here is the method that I use for the post request. So really all it's doing is getting the request, getting the value from the text key that was sent, and then running it through the learner with the predict method, just like you had seen in one of the previous slides. This line right here, I just was getting the probability out, so as a percentage, but I didn't use it. And then I just put, if it was going to be a-hole, then it's going to be judgment and moral. If it's not the a-hole, judgment moral. And then this just to catch the other two cases, which would have been everyone sucks here and no a-holes here. But I never actually get there, or I haven't seen it yet, so it's just there anyway. And then it just sends the data back. So it sends the message back, and then that's processed in the HTML, and it shows the judgment. And that's it. So it was less than 60 lines of code, basically, to train and deploy a model, which is pretty crazy. I know that you people that are probably familiar with machine learning have used your fancy Jupyter notebooks. I literally just SSH'd into the machine that had the GPU resources and then typed in the code into a Python shell. but it still worked. Obviously, it's suboptimal, but this is a bit of just a fun project. When I was training the classifier, I kept running out of memory. That was one of the things that was an issue. It probably would have been solved by garbage collecting manually or reducing the batch size. You could see in that code that I didn't put the batch size. It's because I'm a noob. But also in the course, a little further in, those were some of the solutions that they gave if you had some issues with GPU memory. An awesome thing, and I can't stress this enough, free resources on Cybera. Go get them for free. And deploying a deep learning model was a lot easier than I expected. One of the things when I first tried to start learning about deep learning was I would go on the internet and it was like, oh man, I probably need like a math degree to understand what's going on. But it's not really the case, especially as a developer. And I mean, I'm still a very beginner developer at this stage, but I was able to generally understand the concepts and even be able to train and deploy a model using the library that they had created. So I think that they probably achieved their goal. As someone with only high school math and a year of coding, I was able to use deep learning. Here are all of the resources. So this is the Reddit stuff. This is a paper on arXiv that is an announcement, I believe, for FastAI version 2, so their library. Here's the course and some of the text information. Here's the Django stuff that I used. And then finally, I have my GitHub, which is right here. And other than that, that was my project. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and we'll be checking the stream for questions. So feel free to ask.
Alrighty, yeah, so as Paul just mentioned, hopefully my mic is slightly better now. I'm going to try not to shout directly into it. We've got questions. Let's see. All right, so just a lot of claps, a lot of good job, Paul. All right, we got a question from Abram here. What was the sentiment analysis part?
Yeah, so originally the like in the course that I was taking, they did sentiment analysis on IMDb reviews. So it was like positive or negative reviews, and that was the methodology that I took to use this, categorization of text, because foundationally it's kind of the same thing. It's just applying labels to text in a certain way.
Sweet. All right. If there aren't any other questions, we can pass over to, well, if anyone does have any questions, you know where to find us. We're on Dev Edmonton Slack as well, and Paul's on that Slack as well. So if you do have any other questions, direct them that way. Otherwise, I think it's time for us to, oh my goodness, I have to approve that. I will approve that. Well, I think we can pass this now over to Dan for building crappy Jeopardy using Django Channels. All right. I see your screen now, Dan, I believe, showing GitHub. But I can't seem to hear anything yet. All right, we're going to try the good old turn it off and turn it back on again. Now, we did have this problem with Dan being the second talk. Seems to be something to do with something. We'll see what happens. Yeah, so that's good. It seems like the issue might be just on Dan's side. I was able to hear Paul, and if you're able to hear me, that means that our streaming provider is broadcasting the audio. So we'll just see what's going on Dan's end here. This works. Yep. Yeah, so basically what happened there at the start of the stream was we had it all set up. We were all in the Jitsi call, and then I go in and I hit start live stream, and then I get a big red error message, something I had never seen before from Jitsi, and they said all stream resources are full, and they said that we had to wait for free bandwidth, except we had to start at 7. So I'm basically using Jitsi, except it's hosted by their parent company. 8x8, I think is what they're called. And luckily, I had just kind of set one up the night before, not really thinking that it was going to be a backup plan or anything. Just wanted to set one up for my own software practice. And luckily, we were able to hit the live stream button. But as you can tell earlier, my mic and all the audio levels just weren't set up on that platform. So I do apologize for the clipping that was happening at the start there. Hopefully now it's a little bit better. I'm also not shouting into the mic. I tend to do that when I'm presenting live. I'm just going to try to not shout and get noise complaints from my neighbors. Thanks, Alex. Yeah, it's both. Well, a couple things really. I switched over to a desktop PC that I had built about 2 weeks ago, and I should have probably tested it out during our rehearsal. We had a rehearsal of the stream on Sunday, and I was testing it on my 2014 MacBook, but the fans were going full blast. And when I was alt tabbing, I could tell the YouTube stream was blacking out every time I was hitting Command Tab on my MacBook. So for this meetup, I was like, let's switch over to the desktop and see what's going on. Hey, Dan, if you're having any issues, you can also feel free to just direct message me. I'm not sure. Do you need the link or something? Yeah, well, 8x8 is the parent company that basically purchased Jitsi, I think, from Atlassian a couple years ago. And if you go to 8x8.vc, you'll get a very, very similar looking interface as meet.jit.si. And I mean, that's no coincidence. What you can do from 8x8 is sign up for a free account. And from there, the interface is almost exactly like Jitsi's. That's all right, Dan. I don't know if you can hear us on the stream, but you're good. We're just spending time doing a quick fireside chat. This is the beauty of doing things live and without all of my nice video equipment that we are lucky to have at Startup Edmonton. The really nice thing about having a preamp is I can actually listen to and prevent any clipping that can happen from that hardware. Yeah, so on Ben's note, yep, technically you can run your own Jitsi server, except who really has the time to do that? And all right, Dan, I'll send you the link. All right, now I gotta find my link. Let's go. Should have pasted it in hindsight. Hindsight being 2020 and all that. And let me copy that. And if I paste it Ooh, that is not how it works. Yep. That's what it is. And no, not quite. All right, just getting the link now over to Dan here. Now, I mean, I was being a bit flippant when I said who's got the time to host a Jitsi server. Ooh, that's strange. Okay. So Dan seems to be unable to rejoin the call for some reason. I may have to just give him a separate link. So give me 1 second. That's interesting. Okay, yeah, we're just trying to get Dan to get back onto the call. It seems to hang. We may just have to try to clear his browser cache or something. Yeah, on Will's note, it's I'm personally not on tech savvy. I'm with a much smaller company. They're based in BC called CanCom. I don't know if I could honestly recommend them because even before all of this COVID-19 situation was happening, I wasn't getting the advertised speeds. Even now, that's weird. Yeah, there's been quite some interesting developments happening on the internet. So Netflix has, I believe in the EU, they've been reducing bandwidth, reducing like the bit rate of their Netflix videos themselves. YouTube, I've actually noticed as well now, when you watch a YouTube video, it doesn't automatically go to the highest resolution that your computer can support. I've noticed it just kind of sticks at 720p, which is fairly interesting. All right, so I think while we try to get Dan back online, what I'll actually do is I'm going to just share my screen again. And let's jump into a couple of the articles. So hopefully this works. Yep, it does work. Great, because everyone just saw Pac-Man. Oh no, here's a good one. So I'll actually go into Python Pizza, and good old no script. I will allow that. And so I believe it's being hosted from the EU. Sorry, just looking at a message from Dan here, but I believe they have tickets. You do need to obtain a ticket for Python Pizza. I believe it's 30 euros, but all proceeds do go to Doctors Without Borders. And let me just check here. So, yeah. And oh, sorry, let me probably just kind of quickly scroll through here. So they have, it's quite nice actually. They have basically lightning talks. And so these, I believe, are like 10-minute talks with a bit of a break in between. And it goes and it just keeps going. So I'm just scrolling through this over and over and over. And they have really made up, you know, I don't know what the quality of the talks are going to be. It's honestly, you know, 10 minutes lightning talk. But they sure made up for whatever quality question marks I have in my brain with quantity. So they talk about all bunch of kind of topics, general / Python. And really, as I'm going through the talks, it really helps me appreciate just how many domains the Python language has found a home in. Essentially, there's, for example, the last talk is GPU accelerated cross-filter visualizations in Python. Not even something I remotely thought was, a concept really, but hey, here it is. One that really caught my eye is I'm always about test-driven development. So having someone try to teach test-driven development with PyTest in 10 minutes, good luck, Ken. But I really am interested in seeing that. And so, yeah, we've got a bunch of talks from Python Pizza. Again, it does cost, I believe it's, let me just check here. Oh, I apologize. I use no script. Oh, there we go. It fixed itself. So a single ticket is 30 euros. If you can get your employer to buy a group ticket, it's 5 tickets and you get your company's logo up in the little sponsor section. So that's quite nice of them. And then the second one I wanted to show was PyCon US 2020. So you could tell it was just they just sort of added a tiny little heading section here, but essentially, if you click on this, it will take you to a newsletter sign up form. And if you click on that, actually, oh no, they actually just changed this on me in, what was it, the 12 hours since I looked at it. So they actually added a bit more information. It takes you to another homepage. And in the next 4 weeks, they will be posting their content online. And they still do have a newsletter sign up sheet, but there's also now tutorials and talks. Oh, wow. Okay, yeah, they definitely did not have this even 12, 16 hours ago when I was totally not putting these slides together at the last minute. Oh, this is great. Yeah. Let me just enable. All right, you know what? I'll just disable no script everywhere. Okay. Yeah, all right. This looks a lot better. Here are all their fancy fonts and whatnot. Oh, wow. Yeah, okay, this is great. I mean, silver lining is I wasn't ever going to be able to make it to PyCon in person. Being able to actually now see this online actually benefits me a little bit. So thanks, PyCon.
Hello. Sorry, folks.
Oh, there's Dan. He's alive. Okay.
I apologize about that.
That's okay.
I hope that you folks understand that there's just a couple hiccups here, especially.
Yeah, especially when we do things live and have to switch streaming providers and meetup.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Oh, you're
yeah. All right, so everybody hears me okay?
Yep, we can hear you all. We just need you to share your screen, and we're ready to go.
All right, we're ready to rock here.
Yeah, we've got Building Crappy Jeopardy using Django Channels by Dan Morris.
All right, fantastic. I'm just going to see if my screen is shared here. All right, so first off, who here is a Jeopardy fan? I know that this is a little bit odd of a question, but is anybody a Jeopardy fan out there? Yes? No?
I mean, I'm pretty sure people at least know a little bit about Jeopardy. So,
all right. So I have a really kind of janky setup just to kind of show you as a demo. I'm going to write EdmontonPy as the room name. Okay. And I'm going to go in as Dan, and I'm going to get you folks. Oh, wow. Is this demo going to break? Ha! All right. The demo is breaking. So the demo's not going to work here. I'm just going to see if I can get some of it working. Just to let you folks know, basically what I wanted to do here is I wanted to use Django Channels, which is basically a project that allows Django to kind of communicate over WebSockets. Okay, so that's basically the whole thing that I wanted to do here. Let's see if I can do this. All right, let's see if I can run this again. My apologies. All right, so EdmontonPy. And all right, so what I wanted to do here is I wanted to do that. So basically, enter EdmontonPy as the room name. I'm going to be in as Dan. If you folks want to join and play, there is, it's basically how to play Jeopardy. It uses WebSockets. So basically, my whole talk is how to kind of create WebSockets, a project using WebSockets. So here, there should be a couple of things here that's going on. So I can see that Alex has joined, which is live. That's going to show up in the stream here. I know that there's a little bit of a lag. But what I want to do is I wanted to create a game that I can play with my girlfriend over chat. So which basically lets us kind of like have a couple of pieces here. So as you can see, a couple of people, one person got it correct. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to write an answer. I don't know, Steve. Oh, so it's a little bit buggy, but so what I'm trying to do here is basically just get a live kind of project so that I can actually just play Jeopardy with my friends. So this is kind of just a demo. So if Alex, you could actually send the next question. This is going, so here I've got Don Larson. You actually got that right, so super huge props. But Alex, if you could click next question. This is going to actually generate a new question. So here, I know that this answer is risky business, right? So thank you so much, Alex. Basically, just to kind of keep score and have a game where we play together. And throughout the project, all I'm trying to do here is basically answer questions and keep score and have kind of an ongoing piece here so that we can kind of work together and kind of play with friends. I don't know if you've played All Cards Bad, but it's a little bit like that. So I wanted to create that using Jeopardy to be able to do that. So I'm just going to talk about that today, how this project works. It's kind of janky right now, but I'm going to talk about how to set it up with Django and how to kind of produce this so you can actually create your own. Okay, so just to kind of get started, I do have the link to the GitHub here. Okay, so if you folks want to use that, pardon me, all this project is all public for people to use so that you can kind of get started with Django Channels, which is basically just a WebSocket framework. If you're curious about Django Channels here, you can also go to these docs. It uses just WebSockets to kind of communicate. All right. So in my repo, what do I have here is I have it's just a big kind of monolithic repo that has a backend, which is where I store all of my kind of Django project, a front end, which is a React project that we can use, I have some deployment notes for those of you who are curious on how I actually deployed the project. So we can definitely talk about that if you're interested. I'm probably going to present that at the Exchange.js meetup when we kind of have it. So there's a bunch of notes on how to run the project locally and how to do it. But what I really want to do today is actually talk about how the project works, okay, on the Python and server side, and how to integrate Django channels into your project so that you can do it on your own. Okay, so there's a little bit of an expectation here that you know a little bit about Django. So what I did here is, if you look at the code, at some point, I have apps.questions, and I created that. That's basically where all of the questions are to be able to, or the questions, the users, so that people can answer questions such as this. So this is going to store everything kind of getting on, as well as the scores, so that you can actually see what's going on here. So most of my project is all going to be within the apps.questions, if you're curious of kind of going through it. But let's kind of get started about the actual pieces that you're going to need. Okay, so I'm using pipenv. You could use pip, but the first thing that you need to do is do pip install channels and channels Redis. Okay, in your installed apps, okay, what I want you folks to, or what you're going to need to do is include channels as your in your installed apps, so that you can start to use channels. Okay, and to start to use channels, Django channels, and you're going to have to start to use ASCII, which is kind of a newer feature within channels. So you're going to have to add a crappy _ Jeopardy routing file. This is going to be where your settings files is. And basically, you have a protocol router, and that's kind of one of the pieces just to kind of get started with Django channels that you're going to need. Okay, the next thing that you need to specify if you are going to use Django channels is you actually need to, oh, I have a typo there. So I have an ASCII application. So this crappy file actually stands for crappy Jeopardy .routing.application. And this is going to refer to this crappy Jeopardy routing.application, which is actually going to handle all of the routing in the back end. All right. So to be able to kind of get this, what I have here is you have to define a channel layer. Okay. So for myself, I have Redis to be able to do that. And you can do that. There's installation instructions on how to get Redis set up locally, which is what I did on that server, which is also on Cybera. So huge shout out there to be able to use that. All right, so I configured the channel hosts. So here, the back end, this is kind of showing the fact that we are using the Redis channel layer, so the channels Redis package. And what I have in my hosts is I just have a tuple that is the channel host there and the port. All right, so this is kind of the basic configuration, but what you're going to want to do is you're actually going to want to write what's called a consumer, which you can kind of think of as a little bit of like a WebSocket view if you have kind of dealt with Django before. Okay, so this basically handles all of the messages that are sent from the React project. So the front end piece, what do I mean by the React project? This is all of the messages that are kind of triggered from doing this. Okay, so knowing the answer, writing, what was the question again? British decoration, name for former queen, I don't know, crown. There you go, Victoria Cross. Okay, so all of those, we want to write basically something that's going to handle the messages just like the answer that I sent. Okay, so there's a couple of pieces that you have to kind of create here to be able to have that. And all of the code is within that apps.questions.consumers.py file. So if you want to take a look at that, you can definitely do so. And that's all in the backend folder. Okay, so you need a couple of things here. The first thing is you need to join the group. Now, I read the room name from that, and that's going to be defined in our URLs that we create later. But basically, this connection, I want to make a unique room for each person. Or for each kind of like group of people here. And what you're doing is you actually want to join the group. So you're actually writing some async code in a synchronous context here by using a WebSocket consumer, which is actually a really interesting piece to this project, which is one of the reasons why I was pretty interested in it. Okay, and what you're writing with self.accept is you're saying, hey, I want to start to accept messages from the WebSocket from whoever connected. Okay, so what do I mean by who connected? Whenever you kind of connect or start and get into this room, so when the React router, which I don't want to go much into, but when the React router actually routes this room, what ends up happening is that it hits this connect and it basically says, all right, I'm ready to start accepting. Okay, and when you leave the chat, disconnect channel basically just says, okay, this person is no longer part of this message. Okay, all right. So what the next part is, now that we've got our basic connection to our WebSocket consumer here, so basically getting that warm connection from our server here to the actual server, so the page to the server, so the client, which is your browser to the server. Now that we have that done, what I want to do is I want to start to listen to messages. Okay, now a couple of things that I've added here, a couple of models. For those of you who aren't familiar, models are basically how you save stuff to the database. It's an object relational mapper that Django uses. It's pretty good. If you want to use that, you can go ahead. Okay, but what we want to do in our WebSocket consumer is we want to basically receive messages from the client. And what we want to do is be able to handle different types of messages. So for myself, I have 3 types of messages. I've got the answer question type, the user join type, and the new question type, which is everything that you basically need to be able to create one of these games. I'm sure that you can make it more stable, but I haven't learned my lesson by trying to finish my presentation 10 seconds before it's actually due. So also that's probably why I had to restart my computer. But yeah, okay. So we want to receive messages, okay? And this is implemented so from the method receive. Okay, so the method receive, what happens here is it actually returns back, it returns back the text data. And when you're receiving from that WebSocket, what I'm doing here is it returns a JSON string. So I'm parsing that JSON string, turning it into a dictionary. And I know that this is not exactly the cleanest code, but this is what happens when you kind of whip something up over the weekend. Okay, so what am I doing here is I'm also, so the most important kind of part of this is the message type. So when you actually send, do the group send with the message to chat, with a certain message type, what that's going to do, it's basically going to be one of these 3 types, and it's going to pass it to basically a a method here that are going to actually handle them. So here, as you can see, the answer question, user join, and new question, these are all going to be methods to be able to handle the actual events, okay, of what actually is going on. Okay, so I'm just going to talk about one of them, all right, because the other pieces here, this is basically just a similar type with a little bit of kind of business logic in the background. Okay, so what's going to happen here is that the entire event here, this is going to be the message that I've created here, except for the type. All right, so because the type, it's basically saying, all right, you're sending it to, if this is answer question, it'd be sending it to answer question. If it would be user join, it'd be sending it to user join. It's removing that, it's popping that out of the dictionary. And what am I doing here is I am kind of creating a message and sending it to all of the people that are part of this channel. Okay, and what I'm doing is I'm sending some text data that is going to have 3 main pieces here. So, or I should say 4 main pieces. The user, now this is going to be the anonymous username that you put in. The message, which the message here is going to contain the content that's going to be parsed. So stuff like your answer or stuff like your the current question ID when you're joining, you probably want to get that current question, or your answer when you actually have it. So say, for example, we did that, the first question that we answered in our chat was who pitched a perfect game in the World Series. And I think it was Don Larson. So that information would be passed in the message. Okay, and what I'm also passing, which is really important, is the action. So what the action is that's passed back to the front end, so the React project, and there's a handler which basically says, what type of action am I doing based on this WebSocket message that I'm getting? I have a little bit, I have the current timestamp as well, so that I kind of get a timestamp on all of them in case I want to use that a little bit more. To be able to do that. Now, the user join, this is the sample of user join, but there's similar code if we want to go take a look at it, which if there are questions, we definitely can, for answer question as well as the new question. Okay. All right. Now, to get this to work, we need a couple more things to actually kind of happen. So in our apps.questions package, what we need to do is we need to create a routing.py file. And what this routing.py file is basically, it's kind of like your urls.py for your WebSocket package, if you folks are interested in that. All right. Now, what am I doing? I'm importing my consumers, and I just have a WebSocket URL patterns. So for those of you who are familiar with Django, who haven't used Django Channels, this is a pretty kind of something that looks pretty familiar here. So I have a regex path here with a questions notifications. This is the room name that's uniquely identified. So this is the connection that happens on the backend piece when you actually see the React project. And it's basically saying, all right, here's the question consumer. Okay, now once that we have this routing.py file created, the next thing that we have to do is we actually have to refer to this apps.questions.routing.py within the crappy Jeopardy routing.py within our project. Okay, so I just used a session middleware stack. I didn't need kind of like the auth kind of whole thing there, but you need to refer. So this is the first file that we created. So I'm importing my routing, and what I'm saying here is my WebSocket. I'm going to use the session middleware stack, and this is going to point to the actual router piece within the appstock_questions.routing. Right. And essentially, once you kind of have that all set up, you have everything complete. So the one thing to kind of talk about is you send, as kind of like the front end, you send types alongside with messages and the timestamp. And in return, when messages are broadcast to the entire group, you are going to get an action key, which is going to handle those messages and decipher it in specific ways. And again, there's 3 actions: user join, answer question, and new question, which essentially is the core of crappy Jeopardy. All right. So that's the only thing that I wanted to kind of do with this project. Just something fun with quarantine, because I've got a couple friends and we're kind of all Jeopardy nerds, even though I'm terrible at it. But a couple of next steps here. I couldn't actually kind of get the Daphne configuration all kind of complete with the SSL for this talk, which is probably why I was rushing to kind of get it done. One thing that would be cool is I have all the question history, so it would be pretty cool to see how you perform against other people, how many people get it correctly, so that people that are actually interested in trying to try out for Jeopardy could do that. And the last thing, and I didn't even finish that sentence there, so that's a little bit rough. But hopefully what I'm going to take out of this is not actually finishing a presentation at the last minute. And as well, once this is kind of more stable and more complete, this is going to be actually, I'll send it out in the EdmontonPy chat so that you folks can actually share Jeopardy as well. Now, one question that you might be thinking about is, are these questions actually on Jeopardy? And the answer is yes. It has been a little bit while, but I just took a look at jservice.io and I created a manage.py command to be able to kind of get some random questions so that we can get this working. And essentially, if you want to take a look at the manage.py command, just go into the appstock questions here, appstock questions, to actually see how it's parsed and put in. All right. And essentially, my whole goal with this project as well is to make it so that people can get this configured on a bare Ubuntu server and really understand kind of how to get Django Channels set up so that we can create more interactive games like Jeopardy and Colonist.io if you folks are Catan fans, or All Cards Bad. And besides that, I mean, that's kind of wrapped up our entire project. If you want to ask questions, or if you want questions to answer, you can continue to play crappy Jeopardy. I'm going to continue to kind of style up this project, make it a little bit better, so that we can kind of add some pieces there to be able to do it. But besides that, folks, I just want to say thank you so much. And if you have any questions, I'll be in the chat and I'll be waiting for that so that we can kind of get started there. But yeah.
All right, sweet, Dan. Thanks for the presentation. We did have one question, and Alex did respond as well. So thanks, Alex. Carlos had asked, is it advisable to include a queue task manager in a real-time app like this? And then Alex responded saying that if he recalls correctly, Redis is a dependency of Django Channels. Dan, did you have anything to add to that question?
Yeah, so you can deploy Django Channels with a couple of different pieces there, but Redis kind of seems like kind of the weapon of choice. But Is it advisable to use a real, sorry, I'm just still reading the question, to include a task manager in a real-time app like this? So this is kind of the recommended way, and the people who built this, Andrew Godwin, is much smarter than myself. I just think that this is a really cool project to kind of get involved with. So this is advisable and is part of the documentation. If you want to take a look in there, be able to do that. And I'm not saying go look at the docs, but basically they recommend using ASCII there. Any other questions about this? Thank you so much for the question, Carlos.
So you had just mentioned that this project is on GitHub. I did post a link to it as well in the chat. If you could actually go back to the repo, one quick second here, Dan.
Yep.
Yeah, so when you were talking, let's see, install Postgres, install all of that. Okay, so it seems like if people follow those install instructions, they'd also be able to deploy a crappy Jeopardy server, just as you have.
Yeah, so the whole goal, again, this is a work in progress, but yeah, there are kind of instructions here. And as well, what I'm trying to do is, and I didn't kind of fix this up on the formatting, but there is a how to deploy. So you can run your own Jeopardy server just in case mine kind of gets overloaded or there's errors on it or something like that. I wanted to make as well a definitive guide of how to deploy with Daphne and behind Nginx and SSL. So I will be updating this, but yeah, so that's kind of the whole idea is so that you can actually kind of deploy your own crappy Jeopardy server, or just use it as a learning point to actually use Django Channels. If you ever wanted to create an app that you could share with your friends and play Jeopardy or whatever game live, kind of using WebSockets on your computer or on your phone with friends. This also works on your phone. So yeah, but thanks so much for the question. Hopefully that answers that piece.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Dan. I guess I have one more question, probably.
Yeah, for sure.
Because I've done a couple years of Django work, but stopped at like basically exactly the point when Django Channels came to be. So what is, really quickly, what is Daphne and why is it required for a Django Channels project?
So Daphne is basically an ASCII server. So if you folks have used Gunicorn or Uwizgi, it's kind of the same thing, except instead of using the Wizgi protocol, it uses ASCII, which is so that we can actually kind of have the asynchronous piece. So that is kind of required because what I'm actually doing in a lot of the kind of, and I'm not here to kind of like go into the code and really go into the depth here. But what you can see in the consumers is all the async to sync. So it's using actually a lot of asynchronous code within the project to be able to do this. So this is basically a wrapper, which Daphne kind of uses some twisted kind of pieces on the back end. This is kind of just a wrapper around it. So that's why it's necessary, is because we actually are doing asynchronous code in a synchronous fashion, which is a neat thing, but is why Daphne is required rather than Gunicorn or Uwizgi and those things. If that answers that question.
Oh yeah, no, that answers that question. Thanks, Dan.
Okay, awesome. Does anybody else have any questions here that they want to ask? Or should I play some, just wait for it?
Yeah, the latency is actually really short. I timed it. It's like under 5 seconds. So I think, since we haven't gotten any questions yet, if there are any other follow-up questions, you can always ask us on Slack. Dan, both Dan and Paul, our previous presenter, are on Slack, and you can feel free to ask them there.
Mhm.
Go ahead.
I was just wondering as well, just in case someone was wanting to ask one more question for final crappy Jeopardy, that I would play some Jeopardy here, some Jeopardy music.
I would almost hold off.
It's not working.
I would almost hold off on that
because I was trying to play this in the background. So that we could have that for those of you.
So one of the things about YouTube
fans, because I thought, there would be one last question. It'd be Final Jeopardy. We would have that, but sorry, Aaron, for stealing.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I was just gonna say, actually, it's probably a good thing that the music didn't work, because I don't want to get Dev Edmonton demonetized here. I mean, we're not monetized yet, but I don't want to get a copyright strike. YouTube's been
yeah, that's true. That's true.
YouTube's been kind of doing that.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's right.
Yeah. Okay. Otherwise, thanks so much for the presentation, Dan. I'm gonna just flip over to my screen now, just to kind of give it that nice little conclusion piece. Once again, thanks everyone for tuning in for our very first ever Edmonton Python user group virtual edition. I do apologize for some of the audio issues and technical difficulties, but if we do decide to hold another one next month, I will promise that we'll get all of this as sorted as possible. Otherwise, have a good night, good day, wherever you're tuning in from, and take care, everyone. Stay safe.